Okay, this is the video lecture for the Respiratory System Laboratory. What I have posted here on the screen is the PowerPoint that is in your lab book. I'm going to go back and forth between these two. Some are best shown, I think, on the models. Others are better shown on the diagrams. So starting off with the upper respiratory system, objective number 1, the external Nerys. That is best seen. We're going to go through these structures on the head model we have. So the external Nerys are here, and they are where the nostrils are located. So we call those the external Nerys. So just look for a pin near the front of the nasal cavity. And then all of this here, the smooth area with the ridges, bony ridges on the lateral sides, and which are we looked at these in the skeletal system, but just for our purposes now, we're just going to keep it simple, and this whole region here is the nasal cavity. The nasal cavity is divided from the oral cavity here, so this is the oral cavity and the muscular tongue. What divides the oral cavity from the nasal cavity is this structure called the palate, and it has a bony portion. Here you can see the white bony portion. This is the hard palate. And then behind that is the soft palate. So all of this is soft palate. But at the very tip of the soft palate here, this structure here at the very tip is called the uvula. And the uvula helps to, when we swallow food in the oral cavity, the uvula will tip backwards and prevent food from going up into the nasal cavity. So the uvula is that little punching bag that hangs down in the back of your throat. It also has a lot of sensory nerve endings, so when it gets touched, for example, with your finger, it promotes a gagging reflex. Or if food comes back there prior to our instinctive swallowing mechanism, that too will cause gagging. So from there we lead to the throat. So we have the nasal cavity leading to the throat. And the throat is called the pharynx. That's the clinical name for the throat. So if someone has a sore throat, the clinical term for that is pharyngitis. And the throat is divided into 3 areas depending on where it is. So when we start at the top here, at the back of the nasal cavity is where the pharynx begins. This would be the beginning of the nasopharynx, extending all the way down to the tip of the uvula. So here's the uvula. So from this region here to this region at the very top, all of this is called nasopharynx. And what I would recommend in your diagram in the PowerPoint is to actually shade this region in. So you're going to shade it from the top of the nasopharynx to the tip of the uvula. That's the nasopharynx. And then in the wall of the nasopharynx is a tonsil, and that's shown right here. That's the pharyngeal tonsil. That little cluster looks like kind of a cauliflower type of appearance there. That's the pharyngeal tonsil, also known as the adenoids. If we go back to our picture here, the pharyngeal tonsils in the model is this beige kind of cauliflower looking structure here. So that's the pharyngeal tonsils in the model. And then the next part of the throat is the oropharynx, starting at the tip of the uvula down to this structure. This blue structure is a fold of cartilage called the epiglottis. So from the tip of the epiglottis, so we're starting right about here, to the tip of the uvula here. So this region from here to here is the oropharynx. So when you swallow food here coming from the oral cavity, that food goes into the oropharynx. And looking at the diagram, the oropharynx then would be again from the tip of the uvula here to the tip of the epiglottis here. So this region from here to here is the oropharynx. So in looking at this model, there is another set of immune structures, which is the Palatine tonsils. Palatine tonsils are in the lateral wall in the oral pharynx. So if someone has swollen tonsils, say with a bad respiratory infection, they open their mouth, you'll see 2 large swellings on either side in the back of the throat. Those are the Palatine tonsils. So that's what is shown right here. And in your diagrams, the Palatine tonsil is right here. Again, it's in the lateral walls of the oral pharynx. So when people have trouble with snoring or chronic respiratory infections, they'll typically get the adenoids, which again are the pharyngeal tonsils, and the regular tonsils, the Palatine tonsils, removed. Then the last part of the throat, starting with the epiglottis and moving down to where these 2 passageways divide. So from here the tip of the epiglottis, this is the laryngopharynx. The laryngopharynx, and this is the opening into the larynx then beyond here. But from here to here, this is the laryngopharynx. Looking at the model, that would be from the tip of the epiglottis here down to here where we see the larynx beginning. So it's this region from here to here in the throat. So again, the pharynx is the passageway for both air and food, and then once we hit the larynx, air goes down the larynx into the trachea and food goes into the esophagus. So that's the end of the pharynx when these two passageways divide. So looking at the lower respiratory system then, we're looking at the epiglottis, which is this fold of cartilage right here on the side, and that when we swallow, the larynx rises up and that epiglottis will close and protect any food from entering into this passageway here, the larynx. So if we look at another model, another picture here of the larynx, this whole structure here is a picture of the different parts of the larynx. The bone at the very top of the larynx is called the hyoid bone, and the muscles of the tongue attach here. This is the only bone in the body that is not near another bone. This is the hyoid bone. It's a horseshoe-shaped bone. And then we have the larynx, and that's what this large cartilage here is of the larynx. And inside there, if we could look down the middle of this, in here we would see vocal cords. Can't see them though in this view. I'll show you in a different view. And then there's that flap of cartilage that covers the opening into the larynx, and that's the epiglottis. So this beige kind of tongue-like looking structure here is the epiglottis. So looking back here, again, this is the epiglottis, and this is the this whole region here would be the larynx. The cartilages over the larynx would be this large blue cartilage here. But this little divot here, this line going across, this is a vocal fold. So that's what we call the vocal cords. Those are ligaments that stretch across the opening of the larynx, and that's what allows us to produce our sounds for voice. So this is the vocal fold or vocal cord. There are two springs that stretch across the inside of this opening here. You can't see it because this cartilage here is in the way, but inside there are two gray metal springs, and that represents the vocal cords in this model. Now if we look at the glottis, the best way to see the glottis is in the diagrams. So again, here's a picture of what we just looked at. There's the hyoid bone, the epiglottis, the larynx. Here is the epiglottis in a side view here, the blue cartilage, the vocal folds in the side view. And then if we continue on here, if we look down the larynx, so here's the larynx here. Looking down at here are the vocal folds, and the space between them is called the glottis. So we can't really put a pin on the glottis because it's a space. And when we increase the size of the space, our voice is very low. And when we bring our vocal cords very close together, our voice is higher. When you cough or bear down, you close this space, closing the glottis, and that increases abdominal pressure, and that happens instinctively during bowel movement and during childbirth. So that leads us to the lungs. The lungs are triangular shaped. Well, I should mention one more thing, and that is the trachea. The trachea is this structure that connects the larynx to the airways leading to the lungs. So this is the trachea. It has C-shaped cartilage to hold it open. But when you get to the lungs here, they're triangular organs. So the base here sits on the diaphragm, and the apex is this pointed region at the top. So each lung has an apex and a base. And this muscular sheet of tissue here is the diaphragm. So I'll look at the picture here of a model. Bear with me, we have a couple of extra slides in this photo. But okay, so here is the a lung, and we can see it's pointed near the top, wider at the bottom. Here's the diaphragm. This sheet of muscular tissue here is the diaphragm. And then the hilum, here the front section of the lung has been removed, but we can see the back section, this orange is all lung tissue, and we can see that there's airways and blood vessels leading into the lung. This indented region on the medial aspect of the lung is called the hilum. So the hilum is where the airways and the blood vessels enter the lung. This is the region called the hilum. We also saw that when we studied the kidney. The kidney had a hilum as well, where the ureter and the blood vessels entered the kidney. So if we look at the lung on the external surface, we can see there's some deep grooves in the tissue. These are called fissures, and these divide the lung into different segments. So here on the right side, there are three lobes of the lung. So the deep fissures divide the lung into lobes. So there are 3 lobes on the right side of the lung and 2 lobes, you can see a fissure here, 2 lobes on the left side, because the heart really takes up a lot of space on the left side of the thoracic cavity. So if we go back to our pictures here, we can see the 3 lobes of the lung on the right side and the 2 lobes on the left side. And each lobe has its own airway. And if we look at the structures leading to the lungs, they divide, the different airways divide quite a bit. But again, this is the trachea. And at the bottom of the trachea, before it divides, is a special structure located right about here, and this is called the carina. And the carina has a highly sensitive membrane on the inside of the trachea. When liquid or solid food or liquid attaches, or contacts this mucous membrane, the sensitive area, it causes a violent coughing reflex. Maybe that's happened to you if you've ever been eating dinner in a nice quiet restaurant or in church or somewhere quiet, maybe in class, and you take a sip of your water bottle, and we call it going down the wrong pipe. That's when you get that violent coughing reflex. It's right at the base of your trachea. Again, this region here is called the carina. So then these airways divide, and they divide into primary bronchi, one serving each lung. So this first dividing area we call the primary bronchi. And then the bronchi divide to serve each lobe. So we can see here's a secondary bronchi here, and another secondary bronchi here, and another secondary bronchi here, one for each lobe. Here's a secondary bronchi here, and here's a secondary bronchi. And then these airways divide to serve further divisions of the lobe. Here's a nice diagram showing the different bronchi, but we'll continue. I'm going to show you a picture that we have in lab, a model. So these different lobes of the lungs are further divided into these smaller segments, which are called bronchopulmonary segments. So each lobe is further divided into these colored sections called bronchopulmonary segments. So not only do you have to know that there's different lobes, but the lobes are further divided into those segments. And each segment has its own airway. So if we look at our dividing tree, we have the trachea, when they have the primary bronchi, then we have the the secondary bronchi, and then when we look at those that divide each lobe of the lung, that is called the tertiary bronchi. So in looking at this model here, you can see we have the different divisions here. So these are the primary bronchi, the large ring divisions, and then it's smooth white. Those are the secondary bronchi, and the black tips are the tertiary bronchi, and they are what serve each bronchopulmonary segment. So the primary bronchus serves each lung, the smooth white secondary bronchi serve each lobe of the lung, and the black tips serve each bronchopulmonary segment of the lung. So it gets more and more divided as we move down the tracheobronchial tree. And looking back at our PowerPoint, this branching occurs 26 more times before we get to the end of the respiratory tree. So here's a nice diagram. You can just maybe shade that in to make that a little easier to see. But when we continue onward to the end of the tree, we reach what we call the bronchioles. And the bronchioles do not have any cartilage around them keeping them open. All they have is smooth muscle. So this is red smooth muscle. This is all bronchiole here. And then that smooth muscle ends, and we get into the grape-like structures called alveoli. So these are open air sacs made of simple squamous epithelium where gas exchange takes place. Carbon dioxide leaves the blood here and enters the alveoli, and oxygen leaves the alveoli and enters the blood. So this passageway without smooth muscle that leads to the alveoli we call the alveolar duct. So this passageway right here that is beyond the bronchiole is called the alveolar duct, and these are the alveoli. This is a tissue slide showing the same thing. Here we can see this dark edge. That would represent the smooth muscle that is found in the bronchiole, and then that dark edge ends and we see continuing passageways here. These would be the alveolar ducts. Here's an alveolar duct, alveolar duct, alveolar duct, and then all the little circular structures, those would be the alveoli. And that's where, like I said, where gas exchange takes place. So looking at some of the other pictures we have here, you don't have to know the tissue cells, you just have to know the models. So here's another view of some of the structures. Main thing here is, you know, it just shows the different divisions of the lung. So here would be where the carina would be at letter A. Number 19 is trachea, 16 is larynx, 14 up there pretty small would be epiglottis. Hyoid bone is, I don't see a number on it, but that's what's shown in beige here. We already talked about those structures. So I recommend that you go into the Dropbox folder and quiz yourself and see how well you can identify some of these structures on a pinned model. And that concludes our discussion of the respiratory system.